topic 5.3, the definition of the derivative. So let's define what is a derivative. So let f be a function defined on an open interval I, which is a subclass of your real number, and let x sub 0 be an element of katong I. The derivative of f at x sub 0 is defined to be f prime of x sub 0 is equivalent to the limit of f of x minus f of x sub 0 over x minus x sub 0 as your x approaches to x sub 0. If you can take note of this, that when we say derivative, ang notation ana f prime, kanang na I prime, na I apostrophe. So kung makakita mo f prime of 0, that means it is derivative. Then mao ni ang formula. If you can see, if you can observe, familiar siya nga equation. Recall to nato itong naara. Parihara no. Actually, parihara gid siya because ang derivative actually is just the slope of the tangent line at x sub 0 and y sub 0, or your f of x sub 0, if it exists. So meaning, equal ra, meaning di ang derivative di is just a new term na ang pasabot lang day ana slope of the tangent line. Then there are, aside from this notation, there are other notations kanang I prime, kanang na d of x, same ra pud na, derivative ang pasabot ana. Kanang d over dx, derivative po'y pasabot ana. dy over dx, derivative na. So these are the different notations. Lahi-lahing libro, lahi-lahing mong ginagamit. But please be familiar nga. Tanan nga mga notation talks about derivative. So let's go to examples. So how to compute f prime of, or the derivative of f of x at 1, at x equals to 1, or in short, f prime of 1 for each of the following values. So we have given values, then pangitaon na to ang derivative niya. Again, derivative is just the slope of the tangent line at the given point. So in short, derivative of f of x at 1, or f prime of 1. So how will you solve this one? Given kag function, so ni mo papangita ang slope niya on that certain point. So let's try to solve. So ang atong isolve na lang siguro, isa-isa lang. So good ta aning number 2 na lang. Kaya anyway, linear man eh. Pare-pareha man eh. So we start with kanina lang number 2 atong i-focus. Kaya similar process naman ni ani. So, say for example, f of x ang kuan. Again, ang formula nato to solve for the f prime of 1 is solving for the limit of f of x minus f of x sub 0 over x minus x sub 0 as your x approaches to x sub 0. By the way, this is f prime of x pa di ay. So, mo ni ang formula nato. Then, solving for f prime of 1, so substitute na ta. Limit of f of x, saan na natong f of x, di ba kani? So, substitute na lang nato na si, say, 2x squared minus 4 minus f of 1. Kaya ang x sub 0 man nato diri is 1. Diri man na, mo man na si x sub 0. X sub 0 na diya. So, x minus 1. Tapos, as your x approaches to 1. But wala pa man tayo value ni f of 1, so kailangan nato isolve sa si f of 1. How will we solve for f of 1? Dito gyapon ka kay magbase kay f of x. Tanang values ni x, pulihan na to 1. So that becomes 2 times 1 squared plus 4. Again, asa nigikan, there is a given value. So that will become 2 times 1 plus 4, or that's 2 plus 4, or your f of 1 is 6. So basically, kani actually ang unahon dapat isolve, ang f of x sub 0 nimo. So kung na pwede diya naka mapadayon dire. So para dili ka maundang. So ang limit ani is 2x squared minus 4, tapos na naman tay f of 1, which is 6 over x minus 1 as your x approaches to 1. Then simplifying, we have limit of 2x squared minus pila man minus 10.
Sir, dili plus 4 po.
Sorry, tama. Sorry. This is plus 4, tama. Thank you sa pag-correct. So plus 4, so kani mahimo na ni kung saan na ni. 4 minus this is 2, tama?
Negative 2 po, sir.
That's negative 2. So negative 2 over x minus 1 as your x approaches to 1. Then focusing sa diri nga kuan, kaning 2x squared minus 2, factorable siya. So pwede na to i-factor as limit of, palabas na to si 2, tapos x squared minus 1 over x minus 1 as your x approaches to 1. And kanina po, kana is factorable naman po na. That is now limit of 2 times, so say factor aning x squared minus 1, di ba? X plus 1 o x minus 1 all over x minus 1 as your x approaches to 1. Then by cancellation, makancel na ni. So ang nabilin, kana na lang. So pwede nakakaroon, i-try si substitution. So that becomes 2 times 1 si x plus 1. So that is 2 times 2 or 4. So unsay pasabot ana karon, unsay conclusion nato? Therefore, ang slope sa tangent line ani nga function kaning number 2 at x equals to 1, ang slope niya is 4. Or simply f prime of 1 is 4. In symbol, that's f prime of 1 is 4. Or kung sa'y pasabot again sa f prime of 1 equals to 4, pasabot ana na ang slope of the tangent line of this function at x equals to 1, ang slope niya is 4. So, ing ana ang pasabot sa derivative. Tapos, ing ana pod mag-solve og derivative sa isa ka given function at a given point. So, hopefully nakita ang process. So, basically, ang skill na nga kailangan yun ninyo is kato pag-solve og limit. So, mao na gi-discuss una si limit. So, that's one example. Let's proceed to another example. Number 3. So, number 3 kani. Focus ta dire. For number 3, again, ang pinakauna nga step gyud na, you try to solve for your f of x sub 0. Which is diri ta magbase. Kana nga ang f of x sub 0 na to, so 2 x sub 0 over x sub 0 plus 1. Dipulihan lang nato ning mga x diri og x sub 0. Then this implies that f of 1, nanong f of 1 man, since atong ginapangita is f prime of 1. So ang x sub 0 na to is 1. So solving for f of 1, substituting x sub 0 by 1, that's 2 times 1 over 1 plus 1. Then that will become 2 over 2 or 1. Okay, that's the first step. Second step na katong pangitaon na nimo si f prime of 1. So, sa f prime of 1, you'll determine the limit of f of x. So, copy lang to nimong f of x. Sige, butang na lang na to ang formula para step by step. Kuhaon na to si f prime of x is Di ba ang formula na to is f of x minus f of x sub 0 over x sub 0, x minus x sub 0 as your x approaches to x sub 0. Then by substitution, f prime of 1, so meaning limit ni f of x na to. So mao na tong 2x over x plus 1. Mama na itong f of x na ra, mama sa number 3. I-copy lang nako. Minus f of x sub 0. Nara si f of x sub 0, which is 1. Over x minus 1. Kay x sub 0 again na to is 1 as x approaches to 1. So, bato na lang ani is i-simplify nato ni. So, try na lang tag-solve sa kilid pag-simplify. Kani lang sa, focus lang sa kadere. Focus ta na. So, to simplify that one, pwede ta mag-cross multiply, no? As fraction. So, multiply nato ni dito. By fraction man na. So, we have, dali lang tayo na panong battery. We have, so na to? 2x na, 2 times, so that becomes 2x minus kanina pod. Atong i-multiply. Meaning negative 1 times x, unang negative x. Tapos negative 1 na pod times 1, unang negative 1. Over, sa baba na pod na to nga, x plus 1 times 1. So, x plus 1 gapon eh. Sige daw. And then, pakikuan ko ha, if ever na mali sa process, pagkahuman, naapa sa ilalom, which is all over x minus 1. Kani. I-copy lang na diya sa baba. Ang sa taas, morning i-simplify, nag-cross multiply, tapos multiply sa taas. Then simplifying this one, this becomes 2x minus x, di ba x na lang, minus 1, over x plus 1. Tapos, division man eh, so reciprocal ta. Times reciprocal ani is 1 over x minus 1. So, makancel na ni. So, meaning, ang nabilin, 1 over x plus 1. So, therefore, the I, kani is just equivalent to the limit of 1 over x plus 1 as your x approaches to 1. Then, by substitution, this is now 1 over 1 plus 1, which is 1/2. So, this is now your f prime of 1. Again, unsay pasabot-an ang f prime of 1? That is the derivative of your function f of x at x equals to 1. Or in other words, that is the slope of the tangent line of this function at x equals to 1. So, that's how to solve kung nakarasyonal po siya. Ganina, ang atong example number 2, polynomial. Kani rasyonal. So, last example, we will discuss nga naka-radical po siya. Dirita sa number 4. Radical po ni. Again, first step na to, let's solve for our f of x sub 0, which is using our given, that is just square root of x sub 0 plus 8. Then, since x sub 0 na to is 1, therefore, f of 1 is equivalent to square root of 1 plus 8, which is square root of 9. And again, since given na daan si square root, dili siya positive or negative. Positive lang yun siya, which is 3. Next, after ma-solve na to si f of x sub 0, we solve for our f prime of x sub 0, which is, ang formula is limit of f of x minus f of x sub 0 over x minus x sub 0 as your x approaches to x sub 0. And since again, naana tayo x sub 0, so we will solve for f prime of 1, simply substituting f of x, mamaya itong f of x. Substitute lang na ito si square root of x plus 8. Minus f of x sub 0 na natadari, which is 3. So minus 3 na diya. Over x minus 3 as your x approaches to 3. Kaya again, x sub 0 na to is, this is not 3. This must be 1. Sorry, 1. 1 na siya again because ang x sub 0 na to is 1. F of x sub 0 or f of 1 na to, si 3 man. So mo nang 3 ni dari. Then, recall tong how to solve the limit na nakaradikal. Di ba, kinaunsa to na to? Rationalize. So, kung i-rationalize, rationalizing this one, we will multiply square root of x. Ano mag-rationalize ta? Because kung mag-substitute man gud ta ani, sa baba pa lang daan, 1 minus 1 mo 0. Tapos sa taas, this is 1 plus 8, 9. Square root of 9 is 3. 3 minus 3, 0. So 0 over 0 ni. So mo to mag-rationalize ta. So x plus 8 minus man ni, so dapat mag plus 3 kadiya. Sa baba pod, square root of x plus 8 plus 3. Then i-simplify na lang na to. Limit of, again, pag mag-rationalize ka, katong conjugate, basta i-multiply nimo ang conjugate, shortcut ana, square lang nimo ning isa, which is kung square nimo na, mawala na si radical sign. X plus 8 na lang na. Conjugate man na atong ning multiply. And then, kanipod, square po na to na. Square ni 3 is 9. Then, ang operation in between is minus. So, again, basta mag-multiply kag conjugate, square sa first term minus square sa last term lang. Mao na shortcut niya. Over ang sa baba, di na nato i-solve. Ato lang, as is na lang na siya. X minus 1 tapos sorry, this is 8 dapat day. 8 ni 8, sorry ha. So kani x minus 1 times the quantity of square root of x plus 8 plus 3. Ang sa taas lang atong gi-simplify, ang conjugate lang as your x approaches to 1. Kaya pag ingana na, pwede naman ta, sige, simplify na to ni. This becomes limit of x plus 8 minus 9. Di may mahimo siya x minus 1 over ang sa baba nga x minus 1 tapos square root of x plus 8 tapos plus 3 pag yun, mawala na ni. So ang nabilin, kung saan na lang nabilin? Limit na lang ni, wala na may nabilin sa ibabaw, so na 1 na lang ang mabutang diha. Tapos sa baba, square root of x plus 8 plus 3 as your x approaches to 1. Then we can now apply substitution. So that's 1 over square root of 1 plus 8 plus 3, which is 1 over 9. Mani, 1 plus 8 is 9. Square root niya is 3. Tapos plus 3. So therefore, this is 1 over 6. So therefore, ang atong f prime of 1 or the derivative of f of x at x equals to 1 or the slope of the tangent line to this equation at x equals to 1 is 1/6. So, nga to ang mga conclusion. So, I have given you examples, different examples how to solve the derivative sa polynomial, morning number 2. Wala ko nag-number 1 because polynomial mangyapon na. Similar lang. Sa rational o sa radical. So, ana, mag-solve o derivative. So, at least, nakuha na nato ang derivative. Let's proceed. There naa tayo ginatawag na alternative definition of derivative. Kani is applicable sa transcendental function. When you say transcendental function, katong mga trigonometric function, katong mga logarithmic function o mga exponential function, lisod mangud to kung kani ang gamito nato nga process. Complicated siya. So, naay alternative definition sa derivative is ingani pod siya. Similar lang but ang first nimo is f of x plus delta x minus f of x over delta x as your delta x approaches to 0. Kaning delta x ginagamit ni sa higher mathematics. So, para dili kaayo mo mabaguan, actually kaning delta x is just i-consider lang nimo as bagong letter. Murag ana lang. Bagong variable man ni, bagong letter lang na. So, para dili kaayo mabaguan, ilisda na lang nato ni letter na lang yun kay para kuan. So, pwede ra gyud kaayo ang alternative nato nga f prime of x is equivalent to the limit of f of x plus h. Kaning delta x para dili kabuhion, gipulihan lang letter h minus f of x over h as your h approaches to 0. Again, this is an alternative definition. Gamit siya pag-solve sa mga trigonometric, exponential, o logarithmic function. So, example kani. So, we'll discuss na lang some examples. Let f of x be equivalent to sin x, g of x be equivalent to cosine x, and s of x be equivalent to e raised to x. Kung matanawan ninyo, puro kani trigonometric, kani exponential. Again, challenge mangud kaayo kung katong first definition nato ang kuti kumbaga gamiton. Kung kato atong gamiton, kuti siya basta kani. So mas dali siya gamiton kung katong alternative. So ang first gyapon, we substitute x sub 0 to 2 pi. So ang first step gyapon nimo buhaton ana. Kuhaon gyapon nimo si f of x sub 0. So f of x nato. Di ba atong formula kana man. So kuhaon nato si f of x. This time kung ganina, kung ang given nga x nato nga value is x sub 0, kani ang given ani is x na gyud. So ang f of x nato, di ba kani mao maning f of x sin x. Kuhaon nato si f of 2 pi. Kay ang gipangita is derivative ni f of x at 2 pi man or f prime of 2 pi. So kuhaon sa nato si f of 2 pi. So to solve for f of 2 pi, kuhaon nimo si sin of 2 pi. And sin of 2 pi or sin sa 360 degrees, that's actually 0. So mao nang na 0 ni. Yeah. So using the formula, so f of 2 pi is ang formula gyud nato di ba, f prime of x is equivalent to the limit of f of x plus h minus f of x. So, kung sama natong x dire, mao nang 2 pi, mao nang nailista ng 2 pi, kanin dire nga x nailista ng 2 pi, kanin dire nailista ng 2 pi. And then limit of ang kuan nato f of x nato kaniman atong f of x di ba sin x. So ilista nato og 2 pi plus h. Mao na siya nahimog sin 2 pi plus kay sin x, ang x ilisdan og 2 pi plus h. Mao na siya nahimog sin 2 pi plus h. Tapos kaning f of 2 pi mao to atong gisolve. Nga 0. Tapos all over h. And then kung tanaw nato from this one, di-applyan niya karon og addition identities. Recall tong addition katong sin cos cosine gani. nagamit na nato tong pre-cal nato nga discussion. So since sin A plus B is katong sin cos cosine, so kani pwede nato siya ma-expand as sin cos cos sin. Tapos nawala na ni si 0 kay 0 naman na siya. So ang angles nato are 2 pi ug h. So sin 2 pi cosine h plus cosine 2 pi sin h. And we all know that sin 2 pi is 0. And cosine 2 pi is actually 1. So kung 0 ni, meaning 0 times cosine h, wala na yun ni. 0 na yun ni. Tapos 1 times sin h, mao nang sin h na lang nabilin. And then, ang final answer is 1. Anong ni question siya why? Kay kani, nganong na 1 daw ni? If you can recall, special limit ni siya. Recall to ninyong special limit sa sin h. Kato ganing limit of sin x over x as your x approaches to 0 is equivalent to 1. So, special limit man eh. Na less than lag h. So, 1 na siya. Diretso. So, nga na pag solve o derivative sa trigonometric function na given ka using definition siya. So that's one example. Another example is kani g of x na punta, which is equivalent to cosine x. So again, una kwaon is g of, ang ginapapangita is g of pi man. So kwaon sa nimo si g of pi. G prime of pi, I mean, ang ginapapangita. So kuhaon sa nimo si g of pi. So, pagpangita nimo kay g of pi, so na to. So, ang papangita nimo kay g of pi, substitutean lang nimo si cosine si x dere o pi. So, cosine pi na po ni siya. Which is ang cosine pi equals to 1. Kay cosine sa 180 is 1 man. So, after gamit na katong g prime of x is equivalent to limit of g of x plus h plus g of h, and g of x I mean all over h as your h approaches to 0. And by substitution, ang ginapapangita naman is g of pi. So pulihan na nato ang x dere og pi. Kanipod, nahimo na siya pi. O kanipod, nahimo na siya nag-pi. Next, after ma-substitutean si pi, pulihan na pod nato, i-apply na pod nato tong function na g of x. Kung g of x equals to cosine x, kani g of pi plus h man ni. So pasabot, tanang x dito sa given function, pulihan nato og pi plus h. So since kani is cosine x, so mahimo siya cosine pi plus h. Gipulihan lang si x og pi plus h. Then minus, kay minus man eh. Oh, sorry. Natay mali. Dari, negative 1 din ni dapat. Tama. Kay cosine 180, dari man si 180. 180 degrees, which is negative 1. So cosine ni 180 is negative 1. Motong na minus negative 1. And take note, kung minus negative, mahimo siya og change operation, change sign. So na plus morning, na plus na ni dire si plus 1. And then kanina pod si cosine pi plus h, gigamitan na pod nila atong addition sum identity sa cosine, which is cos cos sin sin. Mo ni siya cos cos sin sin, tapos kay plus man minus ang tunga. So sa again pre-calculus nato na nga lesson. So cosine pi cosine h minus sin pi sin h. And then, cosine pi again, this is equivalent to negative 1. While ang sin pi Sine sa 180. Sine sa 180. Di ba sine is y? 180 is naa sa negative x. So, dili man sila parihag variable. Di ba? 0 na. So, morning 0 ni. So, wala na ni. 0 times sine h, wala na ni tanan. Wala na ni tanan. So, ang nabilin, si negative 1 times cosine h, morning negative cosine h, plus 1. Napaman si plus 1. And this can be written as limit of 1 plus cosine h over h as your h approaches to 0. Okay, gibaliktad lang nako. Giuna lang nako si 1. No, dili daw ni may plus minus dapat ni. Minus 1 minus cosine h over h. And recall that limit of 1 minus cosine x over x as your x approaches to 0 is equivalent to 0. Kaya, kani, h lang ang iyang variable, 0 po na siya. Using katong special limit na to. So, that's one. And for the last example sa kaning exponential po. So, again, first step is, ang ginapapangita is s prime of 3. So, ang pinakauna buhaton nimo is ang s of 3. Solve for your s of 3. For your s of 3, pulihan lang nato ng x of 3. So, e raised to 3. Tapos, for your s prime of x, ang formula nato is limit of s times x minus h, x plus h I mean, minus s of x over h as your h approaches to 0. Then, substituting x with 3, mo na ni. So, 3 na siya, tapos kanina x, nahimo na po siya 3, o kanina x, nahimo na po siya 3. Then after, kaninang s of 3 plus h. Again, ang given na to nga s of x is equivalent to e raised to x. So, para sa s of 3 plus h, pulihan lang nimo si x og 3 plus h. So, mahimo siyang e raised to 3 plus h. Mao nang nainani na siya diya. Then, ang s of 3 na solve naman na nimo na ara. Mao nang e raised to 3. Tapos, take note nga kani, mao ni siya o, pwede na to bulagon as ingana. Kay law of exponent, pag kani, atong isahon, i-plus man nato ang exponent. So, same lang na sila diha. So, meaning, kani, mo nang equivalent ani. So, kaning isa ka exponent mo nang nahimutang ingani na lang. And next, this can now be written as limit of, anara, gisimplify niya, gilabas niya si e plus 3. Nara, kay constant lang man na. So, ang nabilin, kanina lang. And naapot tayo special limit na pag limit ni e raised to x minus 1 over x as your x approaches to 0, ang answer ana is 1. So therefore, kaning nakalingin diri, ang answer ana is 1 times ani mo nang e raised to 3 na lang. So those are the ways to solve the derivative using definition. Duha ka klase ha, kung algebraic lang siya, then katong una, pwede. Pero kung trigonometric, mas applicable ni siya. So, what are the applications ta sa sa derivative? Ang pinaka-basic na application niya is kani. Instantaneous velocity of a particular rectilinear motion. When you say instantaneous velocity, kakuan mo nang sa motor nga naay nga ni gitsura ka ng makita nimo ang speed kanang murag na reload ya. Ana, let's say na diri si 30, 40 na, 50, 60, 70 up to 120. Kung unsa ka paspason. When you say ka ng instantaneous velocity, kanang makita nimo ana speedometer kumbaga. Mao nang instantaneous velocity. Velocity nimo or kapaspason nimo at that instant. So, ma-apply na ang derivative to solve instantaneous velocity. One example is, before tayo mag-proceed sa example, nganong ma-apply sa instantaneous velocity? Because ang formula niya sa instantaneous velocity is similar siya sa derivative. If you can see, instantaneous velocity S prime at t sub 0 is equivalent to the limit of s of t minus s of t sub 0 over t minus t sub 0 as t approaches to t sub 0. So, similar siya sa f prime of x. So, basically, kung mag-solve ka instantaneous velocity, you are just solving for the derivative. So, example ta. We have here a problem. A ball is shot straight up the building. Its height in meters from the ground at any time t in seconds is given by the function. So, s of t is equivalent to 40 plus 35t minus 5t squared. So, kani daw ang formula to determine kung ang distance niya, ang height niya from the ground, kani. Let's say, kung gusto nimo mahibalaan ang after 1 second, pila na iyang distance from the ground, solve lang kag s of 1. So, pulihan na nimo ni tanan og 1 ang t diha. After 3 seconds, asa na ang kuan? Solve lang nimo ang s of 3. To solve for s of 3, pulihan na nimo tanan t diri og 3. Ana lang. So, ang first question nato diri, what is the height of the building? So, how will we solve for the height of the building this time? Isa daw. Ayun. So, this is i-discuss na lang nato ang solution. So, to solve for the height of the building, meaning, the height of the building is the initial position of the ball. Meaning that is s of 0. Anong s of 0 man? Ang time nimo 0 pa. Wala pa nimo giitsa. So, balikan nato, naman siya diri. Wala pa nimo giitsa. So, meaning, s of 0, pulihan lang nato ng 0 tanan. So, kung atong i-substitutean, kung mag-solve tag s of 0 diha, so 40 plus 35 times 0 plus minus 5 times 0 squared. So, kabalo ta 0 na ni, kabalo po ta 0 na ni. So, ang mabilin, 40. Kaya, the height of the building is 40 meters tall. Next, the second question. The time when the ball hits the ground. So, kanus daw ni hit sa ground. So, kanus siya mo hit sa ground. Pila ka oras. So, ang concept karon diha, how will you solve for that is, the ball is on the ground when the height of the ball from the ground is 0. Tama ba? Because ma-hit man siya sa ground kung 0 na iyang s. Kaya again, kaning s na to, s of t na to, mao man ang distance niya, height from the ground. So, kung mo-hit na siya sa ground, 0 na iyang s sub 0. So, we simply equate lang nimo si s of t to 0. Di ba ang given function nato sa ganito? S murag li ni mao. Lahi na po nga given ilang gigamit. Anyway, sa kanina kuan plus 35. Sige daw, ato lang ni ikuan. Ang original given din nila. Ang original given nila kana. So meaning equate to 0 lang nga nimo. So sige, atong kuanon. So we have, reason na ako niya, Mahimo na lang na nimog 0. 40 plus 35 minus 5t squared. Then apply na lang kag factoring. So common man na sila. Ma-divide na sila tanan og 5. So kung i-divide na to na sila og 5, kani i-divide na to og 5, 0 gyapon. Si 40 i-divide og 5 ma 8. Si 35 t ma-divide og 5 7t. Kani minus t squared. So kana. And then pwede na to ipambalhin ni sila sa tanan sa pikas. Para ma-positive si t squared. T squared kani ma-negative na ug si 8 ma-negative na pod. So equals to 0. Then we can now apply factoring. Okay, try down na to si factoring. T minus og T plus. T minus kay minus man eh. Nganong gi-plus na to? Kay minus ni pasabot different sign. Again, kani kopyahon lang pero dire interpret nimo minus man dapat different sign. Minus naman kauna so dapat mag-plus ko dire. Factors ni 8 nga pag i-minus ma 7. Unsay mga number, unsay number nga pag i-multiply nimo 8 pero pag i-minus nimo 7. That's 8 minus 8 times og 1. 8 times 1 8. 8 minus 1 7 man. So mao ni atong factors. Tapos we can now solve separately using zero property of equality. So that's t minus 8 equals to 0 ang pikas, t plus 1 equals to 0. So this becomes t equals to 8 and t equals to negative 1. So natay duha ka time. Take note, t is time. 8 seconds o negative 1 second. Then since in reality we don't have negative time, so this one is a rejected ni nga solution. So ang atong kuan lang is kanang 8. So unsay conclusion nato? Therefore, the ball will hit the ground after 8 seconds. So ana ang pag-solve ato. Similar lang man ani oh. So mo ni siyang conclusion. Next problem. Ang next is pangitaon daw ang average velocity on the interval from 1 to 2. Say pasabutan na. After 1 second to 2 seconds, 1 to 2 seconds, pila ang average velocity sa ball nimo. So to solve for that, ingani ang pag-solve ana. To solve for the average velocity of the ball from 1 to 2, kailangan nimo i-solve si S of 2, minusan nimo S of 1, tapos 2 minus 1. Asa ni gikan kaning 2 ug 1 taga. S of 2. Manong na 90 si S of 2? Again, ang function nato kani. So kailangan nato si S of 2. So meaning that's 40 plus 35 times 2 minus 5 times 2 squared. So pila man ni karon? 40 plus 35 minus 5 times 4. Sorry, 4. So that is 75 minus 20. And that is, sige daw ba? Signal ko mali ha? This must be 70, I mean. 70. So this must be 110. 110 minus 20, kaya nahimog 110. 90. So motong na 90. While ang S of 1, nganong na 70 po si S of 1? So, solve na po nimo si S of 1. So, S of 1 means 40 plus 35 times 1 minus 5 times 1 squared. So, that is 40 plus 35 minus 5. So, that is 70 minus 5. 75 minus 5, I mean. And that is 70. Kaya, nahimog 70 na. Then, subtract na lang, that's 20. Sa baba, 2 minus 1, that's 1. So, kaya, nahimo siya 20 meters per second. So, ang average speed sa ball from 1 second to 2 seconds 20 meters per second. So, nga na. And next problem is the instantaneous velocity. So, ang second question is, find the instantaneous velocity at t is equals to 1 and 2. Meaning, after 1 second, pila gyud ang yang velocity on that instant. Or at t equals to 2, pila gyud yung velocity on that instant. So, to solve that one, instantaneous naman, so kailangan na nato si limit. So, mao na equation. Asa ni gikan? Mao man natong s of t. Asa ni si s of 1? Katong isolve nimo una si s of 1. Diba? 70 man. Cos t minus 1. T equals to 1. Tapos, simplify na lang ni. So, to simplify this one, applying factoring, kani ang nilabas. I-apply si factoring and all. And then, substitute na lang kay 1. Pag substitute kay 1, ani, mas 0 man eh. But, by applying factoring, makancel ni siya. So, ang mabilin, kana na lang. Then, by substitution, that's negative 5, 1 minus 6, and that's negative 5, kaya 25 meters per second. Meaning, at exactly 1 second, ang kapaspason sa bola is 25 meters per second. Same process lang sa at after 2 seconds, unsa gyud ang velocity. So 15 meters per second lang ang kwan. Then last is find the instantaneous velocity at any time t. Kani wala na tay gihat, t sub 0 lang siya, wala na gihatag na value. So same formula kanira gyapon. Pero wala tay value. Ang naa lang nato is katong s of t nato kani na given man eh og s of t sub 0, meaning pulihan lang nato ang mga t og t sub 0. Tapos i-solve na lang nimo ni, i-simplify nimo ni siya kani. Ma-minus man eh, 40 minus 40 mawala na na. Ang mabilin ana is 35t plus that will be mawala ni. At ang mabilin ana is 35t tapos minus man eh 35t sub 0 tapos mabilin pod si negative 5t squared o positive 5t sub 0 squared. Then by simplifying, mo come up kag kani. Pag i-simplify nimo tapos i-factor out nimo, then ma-cancel na ni siya. Then as t approaches to 1 by substitution, so ang mabili na is 5, 7 minus 7 minus, agay. Kaya lang. So na to. 7 minus wala ang color. 7 okay, sabon na to ha. Nagklase ko. Online. After na. After. At baba. Okay. Masa na tato? Sabon na to ha. So kani is 7 minus 1 man ta ang t na to dere. So 1 plus t sub 0. So distributing this one, mahimo na siya. 35 minus, t sub 0 is ang t sub 0 na to, malibog na noong ko. Isa. 7 minus ang t na to may plus 1. One plus t sub 0, tama. 1 plus t sub 0. So this time, kung saan na yung makuan? We have 35, nganong na 10 eh? So dapat actually ani ang nabilin 5 times 7 minus the quantity of t plus t sub 0. Ano? Wala na sa baba diay. So 5 tapos 7 minus 1 minus t sub 0. So this should be 7 minus 1, 30 minus 5t. Sub 0 dapat. Okay, 7 minus 1 is 6 man. Tapos 6 times 5 mo ng 30. Tapos distribute si 5 dito. So there's something wrong on ilang answer. Anyway, basta ingato ang process. So after nimo ma-cancel out, substitute na lang nimo si 1. So ingato ang pag-solve sa instantaneous velocity. So that's all about the definition of derivative. That's all for our topic. Thank you and see you next session.